Well, the moment has finally arrived. After months filled with speculation and countless rumors suggesting it might be scrapped. Altogether, Disney's Snow White has at last made its way to theaters. The final stretch before any movie debuts especially. One surrounded by as much controversy as this one tends to be eerily quiet. It's like the uneasy silence right before a storm, with everyone collectively holding their breath. And unfortunately, the film delivered exactly what most people had feared. It was every bit as disappointing as predicted, a chaotic blend of clumsy direction, questionable costume design, and painfully awkward writing became obvious from the moment the very first song began. You see, one of the film's most glaring flaws is that it attempts to juggle two conflicting narratives at once. The first tries to pay homage to the original animated classic, something audiences felt deeply connected to, especially given the historical significance of the 1937 Snow White, which played a pivotal role in shaping Disney's identity. In that version, Snow White triumphs over evil through gentleness and kindness. It carries timeless themes that have resonated across generations. But this modern retelling feels more like Disney's attempt to rebrand Snow White as a fierce, independent young woman destined to rule a kingdom, and even that appears to be a watered-down version, likely toned down due to the intense criticism the project has faced over the last 2 years. Sadly, neither storyline is executed effectively. It's jarring how easy it is to distinguish the original footage from the clearly patched-in reshoots, particularly because Snow White's personality shifts so drastically throughout. In the film's first third, Rachel Zegler surprisingly embodies a sweet, innocent demeanor, something reminiscent of the original animated character and wildly different from the assertive tone she adopted during promotional interviews. Yet here she is, humming tunes, tidying up the castle, and fretting over a kingdom she barely understands. She maintains this softer persona up until she departs from the dwarf's cottage. Then, somewhere in the forest, and during her second encounter with her love interest, her personality undergoes a sudden and jarring transformation. While still somewhat naive, she's suddenly far more brash, combative, and outspoken, exactly what critics anticipated based on Zegler's initial interviews. She also seems visibly irritated by the way her love interest speaks to her. It's as if two opposing versions of her character are battling for dominance, right up until the final showdown with the evil queen. Then, without warning, she reverts back to being the cheerful, gentle girl who skips away joyfully through the kingdom. But honestly, Snow White's inconsistent character arc is just the beginning of the movie's issues. Overall, many viewers felt like the film was trying to cram too much into too little time. Key scenes and plot elements appear glaringly absent. For instance, at one point, Snow White casually references a character the audience hasn't even been introduced to. The filmmakers attempt to cover this oversight with a quick cutaway to the mystery character. But the moment still feels jarring, especially since the scene is shoehorned in to manufacture romantic tension. But even calling the relationship between Snow White and her love interest, Jonathan, a romance feels like a stretch. Jonathan goes from disliking her and scolding her about her privilege to literally taking an arrow for her, all within a 48-hour span. Sure, Disney stories have rushed romances before, but those are usually bolstered by chemistry. Here, there's none, zero spark. Their entire relationship feels forced, just another item checked off the script's to-do list. Yet the movie still insists they're soulmates. So much so, in fact, that their alleged love is powerful enough to shatter the Queen's curse. But the rushed development and emotional flatness of their relationship make it impossible to believe. It comes across as hollow and inert. There's no emotional layering, no intriguing dynamic, nothing that makes their bond stand out. They simply end up together because the plot needs them to. And if we're talking about narrative shortcuts, the film's climax takes the cake. Snow White faces zero genuine obstacles in the final act. Despite the film claiming her victory won't come easy, the resolution practically hands itself to her on a silver platter. The townspeople, who supposedly don't even recognize her anymore, miraculously identify her the second she walks into town and removes her hood. No emotional speech, no secretive plan to outmaneuver the queen. She just shows up in a red cloak, and the people instantly rally behind her as if by magic. Together, they casually stroll to the castle, where the queen conveniently emerges to confront Snow White in person strangely. The queen doesn't even look remotely shocked that Snow White is alive. Instead, she conjures a dagger and tells her to finish her off while Snow White just stands there, frozen. It's as though she hadn't thought past showing up. You'd expect a more calculated plan for overthrowing a tyrannical queen than simply showing up with a crowd and hoping for the best. But that's where Snow White's strategy ends. Fortunately for the story, the queen decides to escalate things by ordering her guards to kill Snow White. Now, we've been led to believe these soldiers have spent the entire movie hunting her, but we barely see them at all, aside from this moment in a musical number. The film gives us no reason to care about them. Instead, it leans heavily on the idea that Snow White's kindness is her greatest weapon. Snow White, but sadly for her, the blade is abruptly blasted from her grip and, in some inexplicable way, she's rendered completely powerless. The queen is then strangely permitted to sprint back into the castle and dash toward her mirror, as though her top priority during a full-blown coup is suddenly confirming whether she still reigns supreme as the fairest in the realm. It appears that in the middle of losing her throne, her main concern isn't survival, but checking her reflection to validate her beauty and power. The mirror, however, gives her a firm no. Enraged, the queen smashes the glass right as Snow White enters the chamber, and for reasons no one can really explain, this is what kills her. She disintegrates and gets sucked into a bizarre, undefined dimension hiding behind the broken mirror, which then mysteriously repairs itself once she's gone. The whole climax leaves your brain spinning. You're left completely confused about what just happened. And the lingering thought is, how did anyone at the studio greenlight this nonsense in the first place? Yet somehow, this isn't even the film's lowest point. That title, without question, belongs to The Huntsman in the original animated classic. The Huntsman was one of the most chilling and unforgettable figures in the story. The scene where his dark silhouette looms over Snow White, like the Grim Reaper himself, was enough to terrify generations of children. He didn't have a massive role, but his presence was impactful and his contribution added much-needed emotional weight to the narrative. But the 2025 version? It's a total downgrade. This reimagined Huntsman can't even hold a candle to the original. He is the least frightening thing in the entire movie, making matters worse. He looks like he's never held a dagger in his life. He awkwardly unsheathes the weapon and clumsily points it at Snow White while inching toward her with each baffled why she throws his way. Zegler's version of Snow White doesn't even flinch. She looks more irritated than afraid. She easily could have stepped out of his path or disarmed him, but for some bizarre reason, she just stands still and lets the moment play out. It's as if he's been glued to the ground, his limbs stiff, his body robotic, only his mouth moves as he mumbles instructions for her to flee into the forest. It's impossible to grasp what the actors were even attempting with the scene, but whatever it was, it fails spectacularly. By the time we reach the end of the movie, he's just standing, lifeless in the middle of a room. The actor's stiffness is so extreme it immediately pulls your focus, and not in a good way. He resembles a poorly coded NPC in a low-budget video game. Honestly, not even Gal Gadot, who has been repeatedly criticized for her wooden acting, was this lifeless. Still, with all that said, Snow White isn't a total cinematic catastrophe. There are a few, albeit few, redeeming qualities in the film. Most unexpectedly, Rachel Zegler's singing stands out. The songs she performs do feel reminiscent of traditional Disney princess melodies, which supports the claim that she was hired for her vocal abilities. And although the same praise can't fairly be given to Gal Gadot, she did have a few decent scenes. Her transformation into the old hag was achieved with impressive prosthetics, undeniably the result of hours spent in the makeup chair. That physical realism added a rare layer of authenticity to a movie that otherwise relied far too much on digital effects. If Disney had opted for CGI instead, that entire segment would have lost its credibility. Unfortunately, that's just about the only compliment the film earns. The rest is a flavorless, confused jumble. Its storyline is tangled on a good day, and on a bad day, it's completely incoherent. This is the kind of film people watch once, forget immediately, and never mention again. But hey, at least Disney finally dumped this onto the public after over 2 years of dragging out a painfully bad promotional campaign. The last few weeks leading up to the premiere were dead silent. The internet had stopped caring. The buzz vanished. It was like a nervous, eerie stillness before a storm. But in this case, the storm never really came. Instead, the backlash just kept brewing stronger and louder. And at the eye of that storm was none other than the lead actress herself. As Snow White neared its release date, Disney looked desperate to separate its leading women. Gal Gadot gave puff-piece interviews to friendly outlets, saying little of substance. Meanwhile, Rachel Zegler was shipped off to faraway countries, singing for crowds that didn't even speak English. The underlying reason? Well, things got dicey after both women publicly shared conflicting political beliefs. That split sparked intense speculation from fans and insiders alike. But with no concrete information, all attention shifted to Zegler's oddly solo press appearances. Strangely, there wasn't much media coverage during her promotional stops, likely because interviewers weren't allowed near her, and honestly, that's not that surprising, considering how disastrous her previous interviews were for the film's reputation. Still, it felt bizarre. With Disney spending hundreds of millions on this production, why wasn't their lead actress front and center in every media cycle? The answer came soon after her tour wrapped. A Disney insider eventually spilled the truth. The studio had deliberately restricted press questions. Ziegler received backlash because she had lost control, which was unsurprising given her recent string of controversies. A major spotlight had been placed on her romantic storyline with a man who, oddly enough, stalks her. Bizarre, indeed, this time around. However, they admitted that plotline, still, despite a more subdued media rollout, Ziegler managed to stir up criticism. As public response to her disparaging remarks about the original animated film grew increasingly hostile, she began backtracking on several of her prior statements. Unfortunately for her, backpedaling wasn't enough to rescue the film, not even when she praised the passion fans had for the classic version. In an interview with Vogue Mexico, she expressed gratitude for being part of a project that evoked such emotional investment. But audiences weren't buying it, given her earlier dismissive tone. Her comments were dismissed as a last-ditch effort to appease fans threatening a boycott, much like Disney's decision to keep its two leads apart. None of it mitigated the growing controversy. There was only so much time Disney could delay before putting Gal Gadot and Rachel Zegler in the same room, and the studio knew it. But instead of crafting a coordinated interview, they chose to reveal the tension at the Oscars. If a film is destined to fail, might as well go down spectacularly. That night, Gadot and Ziegler presented an award, and their lack of chemistry was immediately obvious. Prisoners typically engage in playful banter to entertain the crowd. That dynamic was missing. Instead, they stood stiffly side by side, reading From the teleprompter, not exchanging a single glance, their interaction was so cold. It became evident they wanted nothing to do with each other. Not even a joking pretense of animosity was offered, which could have helped dispel speculation. They acted as though the other didn't exist until they walked off stage, finally free to exhale. Ironically, they were presenting the award for Best Visual Effects and Awkward Choice given their own film's CGI-heavy execution. Whoever arranged that segment either lacked awareness or was acting on behalf of Disney Damage Control. Insiders say that the feud between the two actresses, compounded by online backlash, is the real reason Disney either scaled down or outright canceled Snow White's premieres, a surprising move, given how extravagant Disney premieres typically are. Red carpets packed with A-listers and endless press coverage. Normally, these events are international spectacles, often hosted in both the US and Europe. But following the Oscars debacle, Disney pivoted. The LA premiere went ahead, but interviews were limited. Media access was restricted to in-house photographers and staff. It was a calculated strategy to prevent Zegler from saying anything that might further harm the film. London's event didn't even get that far. It was canceled outright. The last time a studio made such drastic changes was with The Flash, due to Ezra Miller's legal troubles. If that's not a sign Disney has lost confidence in its product. Nothing is. Even worse, Snow White's premiere became Disney's smallest in years, with disastrous pre-sale ticket numbers. Usually, tickets for blockbuster films are released a month early, selling out within hours. With 9-figure budgets, studios depend on that early enthusiasm. But this time, advance sales didn't start until 2 weeks before release. A red flag for any major release, let alone one built around Disney's most iconic story. The sluggish sales were shocking. Small theaters remained empty for days, and larger ones saw humiliatingly low turnout. Once predicted to earn $65 to $68 million, projections dropped to $48 to $58 million, numbers comparable to the Marvels. Some analysts blamed the underperformance on generational disconnect, suggesting young audiences might not connect with a story from 1937. But that excuse fell flat after people actually saw the movie. With disaster looming, Disney tried spinning the narrative. The morning after the premiere, coverage suddenly turned positive. After years of backlash, media praise surged. Variety dubbed it a visual feast. One outlet called it the best live-action adaptation in years, claims that it would become a fan favorite flooded social media. But the positivity didn't last. Observers noticed that only select outlets, those invited by Disney, were effusive in their praise. On March 16, 2025, that Park Place exposed an odd alteration in a Hollywood Reporter article about the CGI dwarfs. The revision shifted blame away from studio missteps, falsely stating that CGI dwarfs were always part of director Mark Webb's vision. It was a bizarre and transparent attempt to rewrite history and discredit critics. Luckily, someone had saved the original version of the article as a PDF, making the changes impossible to ignore. This exposed how Disney and its media partners were willing to manipulate narratives instead of owning up to their failures. That kind of maneuver doesn't reflect confidence. Once the film was out and public scrutiny resumed, all efforts at image control collapsed. The Independent called the movie lazy and visually repellent. HuffPost deemed it a strange hot mess, while the Times accused Disney of destroying its own legacy, calling the film a new low for the studio and for cultural desecration. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian was especially brutal, describing it as an exhaustingly awful project with a hollow, pseudo-progressive core. Across the board, reviewers urged audiences to stay away. CBS News perhaps said it best, placing Snow White among films that chip away at our culture simply by existing. This entire debacle served as a long overdue wake-up call. Audiences are no longer tolerating hollow remakes, studio manipulation, or performative progressivism. Disney now faces a harsh truth. Its usual tricks won't work anymore.